Isn't this impressive?
Yeah.
What's this place called again, David?
Oh, they call it Pu'u o Alaka'a.
What?
What?
Pu'u o Alaka'a.
Who?
What?
In today's pop culture, the Brady Bunch has risen to an almost celestial level of importance. It's now the quintessential 70s sitcom and has been mentioned amongst the greatest sitcoms of all time. However, if the show was so era-defining and great, why did it last for only 5 seasons? After all, a lot of sitcoms that existed during that era went on for far longer. If the Brady Bunch was so good, why was it short-lived? The answer to that question isn't so straightforward, and even the showrunners would have found it difficult to give a straight answer about why the Brady Bunch was cancelled. But the fact that the question doesn't have a straightforward answer doesn't mean it doesn't have an answer.
I can wait.
Oh, sure you can. Just like an expectant mother in her 10th month.
And in this video, we'll be exploring the sitcom together, and we'll be finding out why it only lasted for 5 years, when it had the potential to last for even longer. First off, what was the Brady Bunch? And what made it such a great sitcom? Why did it capture the imagination of its viewers in the 70s? And why does it continue to capture our imagination even today? The answer to that question is also not straightforward. The first thing you should know, though, is that while the Brady Bunch may be an important part of sitcom history today, the show wasn't a critical hit during its time. That's right, the sitcom may have found new life in today's pop culture references, but at the time it was being made for television, not a lot of people really liked it. And sadly, we don't know why. We can only suppose that the show was about 20 to 30 years too early, and it didn't really address the entertainment needs of the people it was actually made for. Now that we've cleared that, it's important to note that the Brady Bunch did have some success. It had loyal fans and earned high ratings during its primetime run. Unfortunately, it never placed the top 30 shows in the country at any time. Regardless, the Brady Bunch was a pace-setting show in many respects. For one, it was the very first American TV show that was built around a blended family. At this time in American history, divorce rates were steadily climbing, and all of a sudden, kids and their parents started relating a lot more to the idea of a blended family. It was also a source of calm and happiness to people from unhappy homes. Children and parents alike felt like they could lose themselves in the happy family of the Bradys. It was almost the perfect kind of escape. According to one of the showrunners, in the second season of the show, he started receiving letters from children all over the country who wanted to join the Brady Bunch family. That's just how important it was to kids who watched the show at the time. However, one wonders if the kids would have loved to join the Brady Bunch if they really knew what was happening behind the scenes. One of the most contentious situations that the producers of the show had to constantly deal with was how to manage the relationship between Robert Reed, the star actor who played the Brady patriarch, and the rest of the production crew. That's right. While on screen, the Brady patriarch had near-perfect chemistry with the rest of the Brady Bunch. However, the bunch weren't so bunchy off screen. In fact, Reed was one of the reasons why the show eventually came to an end after 5 years. The thing wasn't that Reed didn't like his fellow cast members, it was that he didn't like the Brady Bunch in general. We mean the show. Yeah, that may sound a little bit odd to hear, given that Reed always looked so happy on screen. But Reed always looked that way because he was an exceptionally good actor. And he wants just exceptionally good. He'd gotten exceptionally good training too. After all, he studied with Elvina Krauss at Northwestern University, who was one of the most famous and legendary acting teachers of the 20th century. Unfortunately for Reed, he didn't really see himself acting in a show like the Brady Bunch. In fact, he didn't really see himself in a sitcom. Any sitcom at all. While it's easy to react with disgust at this, as it inexplicably degraded his co-stars, we should know that Reed was going through something resembling a midlife crisis. We mean, here was a man who was destined for the greatest feature movies, but by a sad stroke of luck, he got stuck in a sitcom. And it wasn't even one of the better sitcoms, it was a non-award-winning one that was also quite silly. According to the producers of the show, Reed spent a lot of time arguing with them over story choices in the sitcom. It seemed like Reed was trying to not make an awful situation worse by steering the sitcom towards respectable plots. The showrunners, of course, didn't budge and plowed on with their vision for the story. It was so bad that Sherwood Schwartz, one of the directors for the show, said Reed had an awful temper and objected to just about everything in the show. Of course, that didn't stop him from delivering his lines when he had to. As an actor, he had a reputation for having really high standards for himself when it came to delivering lines and being in character. So while the show ended up looking great, it just left the backstage extremely contentious. The good news is that Reed wasn't that way to everyone on the show. The children, for example, saw him as a real father figure, and he tried to be that for them too. So the set of the Brady Bunch had a situation where the main actor was annoyed with essentially everything that had to do with the show itself, but it was still performing great on TV and was still being great to the kids. It wasn't an ideal situation by any means, but the directors and owners of the show soldiered on. Now, you're probably wondering why Reed couldn't leave if he didn't love the job. We mean, that's what actors tend to do these days, isn't it? Unfortunately for Reed, and perhaps fortunately for us, he couldn't just up and leave the show. He'd signed a 5-year contract for the show with ABC, and he simply couldn't renege on that contract. This meant that whether he loved it or not, he would have to put up with the show for at least 5 years. And that's precisely what he did. Once those 5 years came around, the destiny of the show hung in balance, and Reed was certainly not feeling optimistic about saving it. But that wasn't the only problem that the show had. Everyone else on the show had signed a 5-year contract. So if the show was going to continue as it started, the studio would need to renegotiate bumper contracts for the cast. It was at that moment that ABC started asking itself some real questions. The Brady Bunch at the time wasn't a classic, and it was certainly not a highly rated sitcom. By the end of the 5th season, it had even passed its prime in terms of ratings, which was about the 2nd and 3rd season. In the end, the network looked at Reed wanting to leave and the fact that the show wasn't too successful and decided that it was time to call it a day. The 5th season would be the final one, and that would be that. But if the show was cancelled before it got popular and became a classic, then how did it get popular and become a classic? The thing is, ABC cancelled the show, but still needs to air it. They did this through a special process called syndication, where local stations could rent the show and then show it at whatever time they pleased. Since the syndication gave the show a wider audience, it started building up its popularity bit by bit, and in a relatively short while, the show had established itself as a cult classic. It's just a little bit sad that the show's popularity didn't come while it was still being made. That would certainly have guaranteed it a few more seasons. In any case, leaving the show after 5 years was a great decision for Robert. While he didn't go on to feature in the feature movies he loved, he got a few good roles in very serious series. His work was so important that in 1976, he earned 2 Primetime Emmy Award nominations for his guest starring role in a 2-part episode of Medical Center, and his work on the miniseries Rich Man, Poor Man. The following year, he earned a 3rd Emmy nomination for his role in the miniseries Roots. Unfortunately for the rest of his co-stars, they didn't go on to have colorful careers as Reed did. In fact, for many of them, being part of the Brady Bunch was the highlight of their careers. And for even many more, it was the highlight of their lives. While they did go on to star in several short spin-offs born from the Bradyverse, many of the co-stars eventually pivoted from acting to something else. The story of the Brady Bunch and its rise from relative obscurity to pop culture royalty is one of the most unexpected stories out of Hollywood. But if there's anything it tells us, it's that we should learn to tell our stories. Sooner or later, someone out there will start listening.